Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us in another story from long ago. Tell me if you'd like. Where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Comment below and let us know in comment section. Now let's begin. These loyal companions were also put to work during the war and served in a variety of roles, including as messengers, trackers, and even suicide bombers. These independent creatures may not seem like they'd be suited for life in the trenches, but they actually thrived in the chaos and destruction. These scavengers were everywhere during World War I, and they were responsible for spreading disease and stealing food. These birds may seem like an unlikely candidate for wartime heroes, but they were actually instrumental in delivering important messages and saving lives. From the horses who pulled the artillery to the pigeons who delivered messages. They were there every step of the way, helping the soldiers and bringing comfort to those in need. It's estimated that over 7 million animals were killed in the conflict, which is a truly staggering number. But these brave creatures didn't let that stop them from serving their country and helping the war effort in any way they could. So next time you think about World War I, remember the secret heroes who fought alongside the soldiers in the trenches, the animals who paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we could live in a better world. Pigeons were used by both sides of the conflict. What are your thoughts on the role of animals in World War I? Do you think they were treated fairly? Or could more have been done to protect them? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. And they were trained to fly back to their loft, or a designated handler with a message attached to their leg. In fact, one pigeon named Cher Ami saved the lives of many American soldiers during the Meuse offensive. She was shot in the chest, but still managed to deliver her message, leading to the rescue of an entire company who were stranded behind enemy lines. But pigeons weren't just used for military purposes. They were also employed by civilians to deliver messages and provide news from the front lines. One such pigeon was Will, who was sent by a British woman named Edith Cook to find her son, who had gone missing in action. The pigeon returned with a message attached to its leg that led Edith to her son's grave. It was a heartbreaking moment, but it was also a testament to the power of these birds. But they were also a source of amusement for the soldiers who were stuck in the trenches day after day. Rats were known to fight each other in the trenches, and they were also pretty unafraid of humans. The soldiers would often bet on the outcome of rat fights, and even use them as bait to catch larger animals. And in some cases, they formed unlikely friendships with the soldiers who shared their rations and gave them names. One such rat was Smokey, who became the mascot of the 2nd Battalion London Scottish. He was known for his intelligence and his ability to evade capture by enemy soldiers. But rats were also a serious problem in the trenches. They spread disease and stole food, and they were also pretty unafraid of humans. Soldiers would often do anything to get rid of them, from setting traps to poisoning them. And in some cases, they even unleashed rats infected with deadly viruses upon the enemy, creating an effective and terrifying biological weapon. Cats were able to find plenty of food, whether it was mice or rats that had also sought refuge in the trenches. And they were also less likely to be targeted by enemy fire since they were small and agile. In fact, cats were seen as good luck by many soldiers, and they were often given names and treated like members of the team. One such cat was Togo, a stray who joined the British Army and served on the front lines. He was known for his ability to find wounded soldiers and lead them back to safety. But not all cats were as lucky. Many were killed by artillery fire or poisoned by enemy soldiers. Still, they played an important role in keeping the rodents under control and providing some much-needed companionship to the weary troops. That's right. Some dogs were trained to carry explosives and detonate them remotely, taking down enemy soldiers along with them. But most dogs served as messengers, running back and forth between the trenches delivering important information. One such dog was Wolf, a German shepherd who served with the British Army. He was trained to carry messages between the front lines and headquarters, dodging bullets and artillery fire along the way. Wolf was awarded the Dickin Medal for his bravery after saving the lives of many soldiers by delivering urgent messages in time. But dogs weren't just used by the military. They were also employed by civilians on the home front. They helped search for bombs and other dangers, and they even served as guides for the blind in a time when many men were away fighting. Sadly, an unknown number of dogs lost their lives during the war, either killed in action or simply lost and alone in the chaos of the conflict. But these brave canines didn't let that stop them from serving their country and helping the war effort in any way they could. In the trenches of World War I, men fought valiantly against brutal conditions, modern weaponry, and an enemy just as determined as they were. But what if I told you that there was another secret hero of the trenches? Well, today we're going to be exploring who this secret hero really was, with some surprising facts about animals during World War I. World War I lasted for over 4 years, starting on July 28, 1914, and ending on November 11, 1918. This war would change the world forever, and millions of lives were lost between the Allied and Central Powers. These majestic animals were used by all sides throughout the war and played a vital role in transporting troops and supplies. In fact, at the beginning of the war, the British Expeditionary Force consisted of over 85,000 horses. During the Battle of the Marne, when French and British forces raced to the rescue of the retreating Belgians, the horses carried the cannons through the mud and helped them reach the front lines in time to stop the advancing Germans. The 5th Division War Diary noted that without the help of the horses, the guns would have been too heavy to move, and the situation might have turned out very differently. But these brave horses didn't just pull the artillery pieces. They were also used to carry messages and equipment for soldiers on foot, and in some cases, they even charged into battle alongside their riders. One such horse was Sergeant Reckless, a small but mighty Shetland pony who served with the Royal Marines. He was awarded the Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross, for his bravery after charging across an open space under heavy fire to deliver an important message. But despite their strength and courage, many horses ended up starving, wounded, or blinded in the trenches. Conditions were often cramped and unsanitary, and there wasn't always enough food or water for everyone, including the horses. And when they got sick or injured, they were often left to suffer without treatment. In fact, it's estimated that around 8 million horses died in World War I, either from combat or the harsh conditions in the trenches. That's a heartbreaking number. But these brave animals didn't let it get them down. They kept on serving until the very end. But did you know that amongst the fallen soldiers, there were also animals who paid the ultimate sacrifice? That's right. Over 7 million animals perished in this horrific conflict. So make sure to stay tuned as we take a look at some of these brave animals and how they helped to win the war. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an awesome history video. The Great War may have been fought by men, but it was also witnessed and survived by some four-legged heroes too. These are the little-known stories of World War I's secret heroes. There were many reasons to celebrate. Getting in touch with someone far away could be a difficult task. However, there was one thing that the Belgians did have in abundance: a love of dogs. Finding people trapped under the rubble of bombed buildings. When France entered the conflict in August 1914, millions of French citizens began to flee the advancing Germans, including one woman named Madame Gabrielle Renard. The poodles became expert corpse retrievers. During World War I, dogs played a new role on the battlefield, serving as heroes to their fellow soldiers, pulling the dead to safety so that they could be buried properly. Although no one knows exactly how many lives the poodles saved, dogs were also used to pull injured soldiers out of no man's land. These brave canines were trained to detect incoming bombs, and then alert their human companions so that they could take cover. If a bomb was about to land nearby, the dogs who served in this conflict were trained to perform specific tasks and were treated with respect and care. It's important to remember that they also suffered the same fate as the soldiers they served alongside. But amidst the carnage and destruction, did you know that dogs played such a big role in World War I? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. There were moments of kindness and compassion that gave people hope. The treatment of animals during the war was a reflection of the values and beliefs of the time. While animals were seen as valuable resources, they were also respected and revered by many. The stories of heroism and bravery during the war, including those involving animals, offer a glimmer of light in the darkness and remind us of the importance of compassion and empathy in even the darkest of times. Many of them were killed or wounded in action, and some were even captured by the enemy. The use of dogs in war is a complicated issue, and it's important to consider both the positive and negative aspects of it. While dogs can be trained to perform tasks that can save lives, they are also vulnerable and can suffer in the same way that humans can. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not to use dogs in war is a difficult one that should be made with careful consideration. They were given specialized equipment and food, and their handlers formed strong bonds with them. The dogs' contributions were recognized and celebrated during the war and in the years since. They have been honored for their bravery and loyalty. The dog would grab the soldier by the collar and drag him or her to safety. On many occasions, these dogs saved the lives of their fellow soldiers by giving them just enough time to escape the explosion. What we do know is that they helped bring closure to many grieving families who never got the chance to bury their loved ones. In a time when mental health was not well understood, having a furry companion on the battlefield could make all the difference. The dogs helped to alleviate the boredom, loneliness, and fear that often accompanied trench warfare. This touching story is just one example of the compassion shown by people and animals alike during the darkest days of the Great War. A British soldier named Billy Bishop was wounded in action and left stranded in no man's land. While the use of dogs in war has declined in recent years, their contributions should not be forgotten. The dogs of World War I were more than just animals. They were heroes who served alongside their human counterparts and helped to win the war. His comrades were unable to reach him because of the heavy enemy fire, but luckily he had his dog, Wolf, by his side. Wolf refused to leave Bishop's side and stayed with him throughout the night, licking his wounds and keeping him warm. When the fighting stopped, Bishop was eventually found and taken back to safety. He credited Wolf with saving his life, and the dog was awarded the Dickon Medal, the highest honor an animal can receive for bravery. As she made her way through the countryside, she took shelter in a cave along with her two dogs, a pair of poodles named Satine and Lalanui. But when she emerged from the cave, she found that the area had been bombed and was littered with dead bodies. Seeing the suffering around her, Madame Renard knew she had to do something to help. At this point, most of the dogs were just pets, but seeing the potential they had, the Red Cross soon put them to work, sniffing out casualties among the debris. With their keen sense of smell, the dogs were able to locate survivors who were still breathing, barking frantically until help arrived. It was a simple system, but it worked. Over the course of the war, these dogs would help save countless lives, all thanks to a simple idea and the generosity of strangers. As the Belgian towns fell to the advancing Germans, hundreds of people fled, taking their dogs with them. Little did they know that those dogs would soon play a vital role in saving lives. So when the British Army needed a quick way to get messages across the battlefield without alerting the enemy, they turned to dogs. While not suitable for other combat roles due to their small size, terriers like Jack Russell Terriers, Airedale Terriers, and Yorkshire Terriers were perfect for the job. They were trained to carry small rolled-up messages inside special pouches attached to their collars. Then, working with specially trained handlers, the dogs would sneak out to no man's land at night and deliver the messages to waiting soldiers. Once the message was delivered, the dog would then return to their handler, ready for their next mission. Often these dogs would have to cross no man's land several times a night, dodging between enemy fire and enduring the stench of rotting flesh to complete their missions. And if caught by the enemy, when the war ended, many of these dogs were sent back to Britain, where they became heroes in their own right, appearing in victory parades and even helping to raise money for wounded soldiers. Sadly, many of the dogs who didn't make it home were killed in action, victims of a war that perhaps they shouldn't have been fighting in the first place. For the people of Belgium, however, there was an even greater cause for celebration. In the village of Popering, over 300 dogs were set free from their military service after being deemed unfit for duty. But these dogs weren't just any canines. They had served bravely on the front lines, having been trained to serve as messenger dogs during the war. As the guns fell silent and the trenches emptied across Europe in November 1918, before cell phones, radios, and even before telephones, when German forces invaded Belgium in August 1914, the Belgian army was woefully unprepared. Traveling from town to town, the people handed their dogs over to the Red Cross, who then trained them for one very important job. This was just one example of how ordinary people took extraordinary measures to help animals during the war. And so, she used her dogs to assist her. Throughout history, dogs have served alongside humans in many different capacities, including as messengers, trackers, and even therapy animals. In addition to their work as messenger dogs, but it wasn't just their physical strength that made these dogs so valuable. Their presence also provided emotional support to the soldiers. One of the most famous examples of a dog saving a soldier's life occurred in 1916 during the Battle of the Somme. In total, over 300 dogs were awarded this medal for their actions during World War I, a testament to their courage and loyalty. Although the use of dogs in war may seem controversial today, it is important to remember that they were valued members of the military during World War I. But while the dogs of World War I are remembered as heroes, World War I was one of the most brutal conflicts in history, and the toll it took on soldiers was immeasurable. So what do you think? The muddy trenches of World War I saw some very unlikely heroes. From dogs who spied for the British Army to birds who saved countless lives. They may look like common city pests today, but during the First World War, these birds were some of the most valuable assets to the Allied forces. On June 28, 1914, the Austrians would declare war on Serbia following the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Within a month, the conflict had spread across Europe. To avoid this fate, some pigeons were outfitted with special gas masks. It worked too. No pigeon in service was ever killed by gas. But there was another problem: enemy fire. To protect their feathered couriers, the British, French, and eventually the Germans developed parachute cages. Worcester was a giant St. Bernard who lived up to his name, meaning the dogs had to survive off the rations given to their human comrades. They also had to deal with the artillery fire of both sides. But no amount of danger could stop Worcester. Unlike today, in the early 1900s, reporters didn't just write about the wars, they experienced them firsthand. They rode with the cavalry, sailed with the navy, and walked the battlefields with the infantry. As the war dragged on, more and more of them were killed or injured. That's why it's so important to remember the animals and people who fought for our world, both on the battlefield and at home. You can learn more about their stories through additional resources. By the end, nearly half of all war reporters were dead. Still, their legacy lives on. Today, journalists continue to report from the front lines of conflicts around the world, bringing us the news from the places we need it most. And sometimes, just sometimes, they save lives while they're at it. Because of their first-hand experience, newspapers sold around the world. The public knew what was happening in the trenches, and they had the reporters to thank for it. Even when he was badly wounded by a piece of shrapnel, he still tried to complete his missions. Eventually, his leg had to be amputated, but Worcester never lost his spirit. After the war, he returned to Italy as a war hero and became a father. He sired many puppies, all of whom carried on his legacy of courage and hope. During the war, this gentle giant pulled a sled across the snowy mountains of the Italian front. Many of the animals who served in the war didn't make it home. Still, others were severely injured from combat. But the animals who survived were celebrated for their bravery. Dogs were awarded medals for their service, and Cher Ami remains one of only 33 non-humans to ever receive the French War Medal, helping wounded soldiers reach the field hospitals where they could receive treatment. With snow up to his belly, Worcester never complained. She traveled with the American ambulance service in France, driving ambulances to aid stations and writing up the experience for her paper. While she was there, she met a woman named Gabrielle Beaufait-Chavannes. Chavannes was running an adoption agency for refugee children whose parents had died in the war. Coates was so inspired by her work that she wrote a feature-length article about it for the New York Times. Soon after it was published, donations poured in from all over America. Families wanted to adopt a child from France and give them a better life. Thanks to the work of Margaret Coates, thousands of French children found new families. His thick fur coat kept him warm, and he had the best job of any dog in the world. Every day he saved lives. He helped carry stretchers loaded with men across the battlefield. If he saw someone lying injured, he would stop and help. Sometimes he even went ahead of the stretcher bearers, clearing the path through the snow. These cages would allow the birds to drop safely behind enemy lines without being exposed to gunfire. But they couldn't do that alone. They needed a strong arm to launch them. As the British, French, and Belgian armies rushed to the front lines, they left their civilian communications behind. This massive crossbow-like contraption looked more like a torture device than a bird launcher. But it did exactly what the name suggested. The pigeon gun fired the caged birds like giant arrows across no man's land. Once in the air, the pigeons would glide down towards their target, opening their cage doors as they approached the ground. After delivering their message, the birds would either fly back to their coop or wait patiently in their cage for a rescue mission. The pigeon gun was used for other things too, like sneaking cameras behind enemy lines or dropping propaganda leaflets. But its use as a delivery system is why we remember it today. But there was one thing the military did bring along that proved to be a wartime hero: carrier pigeons. Another would cock the mechanism, and a third would fire. It took so long for the team to reload that the firing squad had to stay in place for hours at a time. That meant they were an easy target for the enemy. Only 3 pigeon guns were ever built. By the end of the war, both sides had stopped using the risky launchers, and carrier pigeons were simply sent out by hand. But the pigeon gun remains a symbol of the desperate measures taken to deliver a message during the stalemate of trench warfare. The animals of this forgotten war are finally getting their moment in the sun. And we have pigeons. One pigeon, Cher Ami, carried the most important message of the war. In October 1918, Cher Ami was carrying a message from American General George L. Berry when he was shot out of the sky. The bird fell into a German machine gun nest, but managed to hop away with his message intact. Though wounded, Cher Ami refused to stop. He hopped another 2 miles to the American lines before collapsing. When the Americans read the note, they realized it was too late. Berry had already been killed in action. But because of the pigeon's efforts, the men under his command were able to retreat safely. After the war, Cherry was awarded the French Croix de Guerre Medal for his bravery, an honor rarely given to animals. Carrier pigeons were nothing new. For hundreds of years, humans have bred these birds for their homing instincts. No matter where they are released, they always find their way back to their co-op. This ability made them invaluable for sending messages across the battlefields. The birds could carry small pieces of intelligence over 100 miles in just one day. That's faster than any other available communication method at the time. And because they weren't tied to the ground by telegraph wires, they could warn troops of impending attacks with only minutes' notice. There were hundreds of pigeons in service with all sides of the war. But it wasn't always easy being a pigeon messenger. The birds were often exposed to poison gas, which could kill them instantly. Enter the pigeon gun. The pigeon gun was operated by a team of 3. One soldier would load the cages onto the gun. Not every animal hero of World War was so tiny. Enter Wooster, the war dog. But it wasn't easy for Wooster and the other dogs of the Italian army. Often there was no food or water for miles. From birds to dogs, animals played a vital role in World War I. But this was a dangerous time to be a wartime hero. But how do we know these stories today? That's thanks to a forgotten group of real-life Indiana Joneses, the war reporters. One reporter, Margaret Coates, covered the war for the New York Times. But not all war reporters had such happy endings. World War I may be over, but the fight for freedom and democracy continues today. With over 65 million military personnel mobilized worldwide, it was the deadliest war in history up until that point. But who were its secret heroes? Who made the difference between victory and defeat? That's what we're exploring today. These animals served as pack animals for both sides of the conflict, transporting vital supplies across the unforgiving terrain of the Middle East. And they weren't just any ordinary camels. They were specifically bred for their strength and endurance. The Indian and Thai forces used elephants to move supplies and ammunition. With their massive size and strength, these gentle giants were able to carry heavy loads for long distances through the difficult jungle terrain. During the Battle of Changde in November 1917, Japanese forces used elephants to charge into enemy trenches and cause massive casualties. These elephants were equipped with armor plating, and some even had machine guns mounted on their backs. Just imagine the surprise on the faces of the German soldiers when they saw a charging elephant with a machine gun. Talk about a war elephant. A group of rats infected with the plague bacteria found their way onto a British hospital ship, the Anglia, where they infected a sailor named Winston Churchill. Well, the plague killed so many people in England that the government had to call off the conscription plans that were in place. This meant fewer soldiers were available to fight in the war. Instead, Britain ended up relying on volunteers to keep their army afloat. And we all know what happened next. He was a young man when he enlisted in the army, and he was just 19 years old when he was sent into battle. They were real people with real emotions who had dreams and hopes for the future, but they put those aside to serve their country and protect their loved ones. These men were the true heroes of the First World War, and their sacrifice should never be forgotten. His mother had begged him not to go, but he felt a sense of duty and honor that was stronger than her pleas. He was killed in action just a few weeks later. Another hero was Private Thomas Bell of the London Scottish. He was a married man with a young son when he joined the war effort, and his wife had given birth to their daughter just days before he was sent to the front line. He wrote letters to his family every day, describing the horrors of war and the bravery of his comrades. He was killed in action at the Battle of Loos in 1915. The war dragged on for another 2 years, with even more deaths and destruction. So while it might seem crazy to think that a small rodent could have such a big impact on the course of history, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thanks for watching. It's true. The black rat was a secret hero of World War I. Okay, not that Winston Churchill, although he did serve in the British Navy during the early stages of the war before becoming a politician. These were the guys who were sent into dangerous situations with little training or equipment, knowing that most of them would be killed or injured. These men were given outdated weapons and little to no training, and they were expected to hold their ground against heavily armed and experienced enemy soldiers. But you know what? They did it. They held their ground, and they fought with all their might, even though they knew the odds were stacked against them. These men were not just cannon fodder. They were heroes. They were the ones who made the ultimate sacrifice so that the generals could achieve their objectives, often with the expectation that they wouldn't come back alive. But here's the thing. These men were still human beings. They had families and friends who loved them, and they had dreams and aspirations for the future. But war doesn't care about any of that. These men were seen as nothing more than pawns in a game of chess, moved around by the generals to wherever they were most needed, regardless of the cost. Anyway, Churchill became so sick he almost died, but he recovered and was sent home to Britain. Unfortunately, the rats made the journey back to France with him. From there, they spread the plague to other parts of the country, and soon England was dealing with an epidemic. Plus, they were also great for clearing paths through the thick undergrowth and creating bridges over streams and rivers. Just imagine the scene. An elephant using its tusks to uproot trees and create a pathway for the troops. Pretty impressive, huh? I'm talking about the lowly water rat. No, seriously, the black rat. This tiny creature played a major role in the outcome of the war. See, the black rat is a carrier of the bacteria that causes plague. And during the war, these rats found a new mode of transportation, thanks to the troops who were moving around Europe in large numbers. Soldiers from different countries lived in close quarters, with rats making their homes in their tents and on their ships. This created the perfect condition for the spread of disease. Capable of carrying heavy loads for long periods of time without food or water, the British built a narrow-gauge railway line from the port of Bombay to the front lines. The elephants were loaded onto the train cars and then transported to their destination. Many died from artillery fire, while others succumbed to diseases like cholera and anthrax. However, despite the losses, the elephants continued to serve on the front lines until the end of the war. These noble creatures were true heroes of the battlefield, helping to win many important victories for the Allied forces. Once they arrived, they would help unload the supplies and then continue on to the next stop. The First World War was not just fought by soldiers. It was also fought by camels. That's right. But why were camels such an important part of the British campaign in the Middle East? Well, let me tell you, there are several reasons. But thanks to their trusty camels, they were able to outmaneuver and outgun their enemies. One of the most famous examples of this was during the Battle of Romani in August 1915. The British were outnumbered 3-1, but they used their camels to quickly move supplies and reinforcements to the front line. This allowed them to hold off the Ottomans and eventually win the battle. The British even had special camel guns mounted on the back of armored vehicles to protect them from enemy fire. And yes, you heard that right, armored vehicles. It may sound strange now, but back then it was a genius idea to protect those precious camels. First, the terrain is extremely harsh. It's hot, it's dry, and there's not much vegetation around. So you need an animal that can withstand these conditions. Secondly, the British needed a way to transport supplies across the desert quickly. And camels were perfectly suited for this task. They can travel up to 30 miles per hour and cover vast distances without needing to rest. Finally, camels were also used for riding, which allowed the British to move their troops more quickly across the desert. They could travel up to 60 miles per day on a camel, which is much faster than walking. As the British advanced into the Middle East, they faced fierce resistance from the Ottoman Empire. But camels weren't the only secret heroes of the Middle East. Elephants played a big role too. But how exactly did these elephants get to the front lines? Well, they were transported on trains. Yes, trains. However, These giant mammals weren't just used as laborers. They were also used as weapons of war. But these brave animals were not without their own casualties. Another secret hero of the Great War was a little guy, so small you probably didn't even notice him. It all started in France. But how did the black rat affect the outcome of the war? Let's talk about the men who were considered expendable cannon fodder. For example, during the Battle of the Somme in 1916, British commanders ordered waves of soldiers to attack enemy trenches. One of these heroes was Private Jack Chadwick of the Manchester Regiment. These men were not just cannon fodder. They were fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. Now, if you want to learn more about the lesser-known aspects of World War I, check out this video over here. During World War I, there was one group of people who were responsible for saving countless lives, but they didn't get the recognition they deserved until after the war ended. Of those who served in World War I and how they risked their own lives to save others. The first thing they had to leave behind was their own personal freedom. They gave up their lives and left everything behind when they went off to war. But when they got there, they realized it wasn't what they expected. They were needed where they were and couldn't just leave their post. This meant that they missed out on important family events, such as weddings and funerals. They also missed out on holidays and other celebrations. In addition, they were often too busy to write letters or make phone calls home, so they didn't have much contact with their families for long periods of time. This was tough for them, because many of them had never been away from their families for so long. The doctors and nurses did their best to make sure that every other option had been exhausted before resorting to this. Those who served in the medical field during World War I were unsung heroes. Their contributions were not widely recognized, nor were they given the medals and honors that they had earned. They worked in hospitals, clinics, and private practice, helping to heal the wounded both physically and emotionally. They also became advocates for veterans, helping to improve the quality of care and benefits that were available to them. They put their own lives on the line to help save the lives of wounded soldiers, and their contributions were essential to the Allied victory. They left their homes and families behind. Which of these points do you think was the most difficult for these heroes to endure? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thanks for watching. Facing the horrors of war and the threat of death on a daily basis. Many of them suffered physical and emotional wounds that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Despite the risks and sacrifices they made, they remained committed to their duty, providing medical care to those in need. They were true heroes of World War I, and their service should be remembered and honored. Although they did not receive the recognition they deserved at the time, they have since been honored for their service. Their stories remind us of the importance of honoring those who serve in the medical field, not only during times of war, but always. Their dedication and sacrifice did not go unnoticed, and over time, they began to receive the recognition they deserved. This was partly because of the stigma surrounding mental health at the time. The psychological toll of war was not understood, and those who suffered from it were often seen as weak or unworthy of recognition. Additionally, the focus of the victory celebrations was on the soldiers who had fought in the battles rather than those who had supported them. As a result, many of the veterans who had served in the medical field returned home, feeling disillusioned and unappreciated. They worked tirelessly to save the lives of wounded soldiers, often putting their own lives on the line. Despite the dangerous working conditions and the emotional toll it took on them, they continued to do their jobs without complaint. Today, we remember and honor the service of those who served in the medical field during World War I. Their bravery, selflessness, and dedication should be celebrated, and their contributions should never be forgotten. They were the backbone of the medical effort during the war, and their work was essential to the Allied victory. Putting a soldier down was a difficult decision that was made with the best interests of the soldier in mind. It was not taken lightly, and was only done when all other options had been considered. It also made it difficult for their families to keep in touch with them and find out how they were doing. They weren't just going to be fighting in battles like they had seen in the movies. They would read about the progress of the war and learn about what was happening back home. They knew that what they were doing was important and that they were helping to save lives. They were proud of their service and the difference they were making. If the wounds were too severe and there was no hope of recovery, then the soldier would be put down. This was done to end their suffering and also to conserve resources for the other wounded soldiers. The process of putting a soldier down was quick and painless, usually involving a single gunshot to the head. It was a sad but necessary part of war. This helped them feel connected to the world, even when they were stuck in one place for months at a time. However, the newspapers weren't always accurate, and sometimes they would print things that were untrue or that made the soldiers feel bad about themselves. For example, they might say that the soldiers were cowards or that they were abandoning their posts. This would upset the soldiers and make them feel like they weren't doing enough. They were also going to have to deal with the aftermath of the battles. This meant that they had to spend long periods of time cleaning up and tending to the wounded. One of the most heartbreaking things about World War I was the number of wounded soldiers that were put down, meaning they were euthanized due to their injuries. It's estimated that over 7 million soldiers were wounded during the war, and many of them were left with life-changing injuries. The medical technology of the time was not advanced enough to save everyone, and so many soldiers died or were put down. They had to deal with the smell of death and decay and the sight of mutilated bodies. All this took a toll on their mental health, and many of them suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder when they came home. We'll also take a look at the cost they paid to save so many lives. These were the men who signed up to serve in the military, but no one knew that they would be doing so much more than they had anticipated. They were the ones who took care of the wounded soldiers and the animals. They saved many lives, but at what cost? Today, we'll be taking a look back at some of the most harrowing experiences, the cost they paid. In addition to this, they were often in danger themselves. Even when they weren't fighting in battles, they were still at risk of being killed or wounded. They were always in danger of being killed or wounded, not only by the enemy, but also by disease and exposure to the elements. For example, if a hospital ship was sunk by an enemy attack, then all the people on board, including the service members, would be at risk of drowning or being taken prisoner. Also, if they were working outside in the hot sun for long periods of time, they could easily become dehydrated or suffer from heat stroke. And if they were working in cold conditions, they could freeze to death or suffer from frostbite. For example, if a hospital ship was sunk by an enemy attack, then all the people on board, including the service members, would be at risk of drowning or being taken prisoner. Another cost they had to pay was their safety. They also had to deal with the fact that they couldn't go home, even if they wanted to. One way they kept in touch with the outside world was through newspapers. But despite all these costs, they still did their jobs. Wounded often put down. When a soldier was brought to the medical tent, they were assessed by a doctor to determine the severity of their wounds. And while it was never easy, few got recognition. However, when the war ended, they came home to a hero's welcome. Despite the lack of recognition, they continued to provide medical care to those in need. They were awarded medals and honors, and their stories began to be told. Although many of those who served in the medical field during World War I were not recognized for their service, their bravery and selflessness should not be forgotten. These brave men paid a heavy price to help save the lives of countless others. Now it's time for you to make your voice heard. The First World War may be over, but the stories of those who served are just now coming to light. And today we'll now meet some of the heroes of that war from all sides who deserve more recognition than they received in their own time. But first, Here at the channel, we love animals, and so do our veterans. This is mostly because the U.S. had no dog in the fight. Their involvement came when Germany began unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking ships like the Lusitania without warning. They were designed to honor those who served during the war, which included a great number of animals. But rabbits weren't considered proper war animals. So instead of getting a medal, she got an honorable mention in the official gazette. Ordinary people performed extraordinary acts of bravery and kindness in the face of death and destruction. His job was to take messages and deliver them to those who needed them. Charles Richet was a French physiologist who specialized in the digestive system of animals. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1913 for his research into allergies and anaphylaxis. Many countries built elaborate memorials to commemorate the sacrifices made by their soldiers. The United States built the Aisne-Marne American Monument near the town of Château-Thierry, France. It was designed to resemble a broken column with a statue of a soldier at the top. It resulted in the deaths of an estimated 16 million people, including soldiers and civilians alike. The war had a profound impact on the world. As we remember the sacrifices made by the soldiers and civilians alike, we can also take a moment to remember the animals who served and sacrificed alongside them, leading to the collapse of empires, the redrawing of borders, and the rise of new ideologies. And check out our other videos for more historical tales. Thanks for watching. In the aftermath of the war, people began to search for answers as to why so much death and destruction had occurred. This led to the emergence of several theories about the causes of the war. One popular theory is that the war was caused by a failure of diplomacy. This view holds that the leaders of the European powers were unable to resolve their differences peacefully, leading to a diplomatic crisis that eventually erupted into war. Another theory is that the war was caused by a buildup of militarism in Europe. This view holds that the competition among European powers to build up their militaries created an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility that eventually led to war. It was built to honor the American Expeditionary Forces who fought in the Battle of the Marne, which helped to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. The monument was dedicated in 1931 and remains a popular destination for tourists and veterans. During the war, he volunteered to serve as a medical officer. However, he wasn't qualified for the role and had no experience. The name is Menin Gate, which refers to the gate in the surrounding wall. It was designed by Sir Reginald Blomfield Take. For example, the grave of Private Joseph Byers, an Australian soldier who was killed in action. His grave is located in a small cemetery in France and is marked by a headstone that reads "Known unto God." It is a simple but powerful reminder of the sacrifice made by the soldiers who fought and died in the war. Visitors to the cemetery often leave flowers or other tributes at the grave, and serves as a memorial to the British soldiers who died in the Ypres salient and are buried in Belgium. The names of nearly 55,000 dead soldiers are inscribed on the gate. The Menin Gate is also the location of the Last Post ceremony, which has been held every evening since 1928. It is a solemn event that is attended by tourists and veterans alike. This didn't stop him from claiming in newspaper articles that he had treated thousands of cases of gas poisoning and developed an effective treatment for it. While it's true he treated patients suffering from mustard gas exposure, these claims were false. He never treated thousands of patients, and his treatment consisted of giving them morphine and leaving them to die. He was tried for spreading false news and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, he was later pardoned and died believing himself to be a hero. He would ride out to the front line, often taking items such as tobacco or chocolates to the soldiers. But on one occasion, he saw a young officer who had been shot in the abdomen and was in terrible pain. John took him off the battlefield and cared for him until he could walk. He then arranged for him to be transferred to a hospital where he eventually recovered. John was awarded the Imperial Service Medal for his courage, but he refused it, saying he didn't deserve it. Despite this, he continued his work until the end of the war, when he returned to Australia. A street was named after him in his hometown. Take, for example, Frank Pardon, an Australian stretcher bearer whose job was to bring supplies and water to the front lines. One day, while carrying a load of supplies, he saw a British soldier lying near an old dugout. Luigi Galliani was an Italian journalist and activist who opposed World War I. He believed that war was a distraction from the real problems facing Italy, and that the country should focus on domestic issues rather than foreign conflicts. Galliani organized protests and demonstrations against the war, and was eventually arrested for his activities. He was interned in a prison camp for 3 years, but he continued to speak out against the war. When he was released, he resumed his activism and was elected to Parliament. He remained a vocal critic of the war until his death in 1922. Frank went to help him, but the soldier told him to go away, as he was certain he was going to die. But Frank didn't leave, and he spent the night with the soldier, talking and comforting him. In the morning, he returned to the dugout to get some rest, but soon afterward, it was bombed and destroyed. The next day, he was sent to another part of the front, where he saved the life of another soldier who had become trapped under a fallen tree. He was awarded the military medal for his bravery, but sadly passed away in 1918 from wounds sustained in the war. This is why the animals who received medals often became local heroes, with statues and memorials being erected in their honor. For example, a statue was built in the town of Reims to commemorate Wolf, a dog who saved many lives delivering messages during the Battle of the Marne. Similarly, a memorial was erected to Flossie, a terrier who helped a disabled veteran through 2 world wars. But these animals weren't the only ones honored in this way. While most pets stayed at home, some animals accompanied their owners to war. This included Billy, a terrier owned by the Bishop of London, who served with the Canadian Army Medical Corps. He tended to the wounded and even learned to carry messages between officers. He earned the nickname the Bishop's Dog and was awarded the Dickin Medal in 1919 for his service. Other animals were specifically enlisted, such as pigeons who delivered important messages and dogs who assisted soldiers in the field. When they returned home, many of these animals received medals and recognition for their service. But not all of them were so lucky, which carried American passengers and cargo. After this and other incidents, the U.S. declared war on Germany. America's entry into the conflict allowed the already exhausted Allies to finally win the war. But how did they celebrate? Did you know there's a medal for bravery awarded to animals who save lives? There are actually 2. The first is the Dickin Medal, which was established in 1942 and awarded to animals, typically dogs, who displayed extraordinary bravery or devotion to their owners or their country. There have been 72 awards since it was created, including this one to Gander, a West Highland White Terrier who saved his owner by alerting him to an avalanche that both men were caught in. The second is the PDSA Medal, which has been awarded to cats and dogs since 1947 for acts of bravery, devotion, or loyalty, even if they don't put themselves at risk. The latest recipient was a cat named Poppy, who helped her owner cope with anxiety attacks. These medals recognize that animals can be heroes too. But back to the human heroes of World War I. Almost everyone has heard of World War I, but fewer remember that the United States didn't enter the war until 1917. In Britain, President Woodrow Wilson was given a hero's welcome, with crowds cheering and waving American flags. He met with King George V and toured London before making a speech that made it clear he supported the Allies' goals. In France, the Americans were greeted with bread, wine, and cheese, along with enthusiastic cheers. Churches were opened and bells were rung to celebrate the end of hostilities. However, there were still 4 months before the Treaty of Versailles was signed. So this wasn't quite the end of the war yet. To mark the occasion, Britain issued a set of medals known as Victory and Interwar Service Medals. Animals weren't the only heroes of the war. While ordinary people could be honored for their actions, sometimes those in charge could use the war as an opportunity to make themselves look better. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it.